Hey, how's it going? Hey, I'm Brandon. I'm with KINT News, and yeah, I was just here to cover the event. If that's okay.
It's okay with me if it's okay with you.
Yeah, sweet. I'm Brandon. Nice to meet you. Oh, okay, sweet. Yeah, I was hoping if you to talk to you beforehand if you're willing to kind of talk about. Okay, yeah, sweet. Okay, so yeah, I'll just have a camera, like just step outside. I'll come grab you in a few minutes. That works. Okay, great. Thank you.
Feel free to find a spot in the exhibit hall if you want to for a cool background or whatever.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, whatever works best for you.
Yeah. Let's start it out.
Yeah.
We did some very, we did some interviews. People for curriculum project. Yeah. Uh-huh. No. When did it come out? When did they? Uh, Over there. Well,
And there's summer.
they know. They're supposed to. Yeah.
Oh, she-
What is it say?
These.
Nice.
Yeah.
Are you sure? This is second. House is up in there. Oh, cool. And that's the cemetery over there, that's Oakwood? Bring that dance to this. Came from there. At some kind of contract. And I think it's gonna be with it. Okay. Come on.
So I'm going to introduce you, and I'm from the Department of Shameless Commerce, so this is where I'm going to get membership. Also, remind people that
I didn't,
George Stoppel.
I didn't know.
When I came, so I'll say a few things about that. And is there anything in particular you want me to say about? Any? Oh, okay. Hey, guys.
That feels like okay. Entire year. Yeah.
Okay, I don't think I'm gonna be able to remember the title of, is it, let me. Smile, okay, and then you can remind us, yeah. Yeah, okay.
It was very.
I really appreciate it again for doing this, the topic I like to remind people know about, so. I'll let you get set up though, so whatever you need.
I think I'm ready.
Okay.
He's gonna test the clicker. There we go. Clicker works. Hey, coach, how you doing? Good.
Yeah.
Other than maybe getting treated at the mail. I don't know, actually. Yeah, I know, St. Paul is big. But, and probably, there is this is a route from Chicago to St. Paul, but,
My mother grew up in Hager City, Wisconsin, and they say that, no.
oh,
Area.
okay, sure. Yeah, and, Dana is one of our resident, volunteer researchers, historians. He's the man in the wide brimmed hat there.
I thought you were gonna say the yellow hat.
That is, that's right, and I'm George, so. Dana, have you read anything in your research on gangsters in Hempstead County? Other than the ones at the History Center, right?
Yeah. Back in the 40s.
When you say that, it makes me think of the cave,
Yeah, of course.
without any knowledge.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah, that,
no, I've never run.
Yeah, I didn't either.
St. Paul, Minneapolis.
well, this helped very good, and I've heard several stories over the years about it. And the whole, answer man. And,
Who was he?
you're not just.
In 19.
Yeah. Okay, it's just north of there. Yep. And the story I heard, be it right or wrong.
Sure.
Was that, and later on, the story corroborates part of that, and this house recently.
In 19.
Stuff. But,
That's pretty
that
big.
house started by a doctor that came here from Chicago. And he died within a year and a half, and, never completed the house. The house was gone, I had completed, and then it was, rented out as rooming houses, many bedrooms, many bathrooms. And that was
3 minutes.
about 1930. And through that period of time, I had heard
Hey,
that, some of the people that came here to that house were the underworld figures from Chicago that might have come here to kind of cool off, or might have come here to go to medical services.
Okay.
And then I also heard that, two stories that kind of coincide. One was that, during World War II, pilots were housed there. And I also,
we would know that.
and I also heard another. Might have been the ones that were housed there, but I was just wondering if there was any.
Wood's son who wrote the book, know that answer. And then he opened the door for the pilots.
You gotta come visit the archive.
Yeah. I mean,
So I'm curious to take that down, you know. Okay, all right. Yeah, great. Curious my old age, if I.
can.
Be validated, then it would be.
You're in the right place. for it.
Maybe there's rumors and stories.
Hey, even Geraldo, what's that name? Geraldo Rivera. It happens to all of us.
Well, we'll die and he'll die with it going.
Yeah, exactly. All right, folks, hello, thank you all for coming this evening. My name is Wayne Ganaway. I am the Executive Director of the History Center of Homestead County. I am so pleased to see such a great turnout tonight for an important lecture. We have a lecture at least once a month. Madeline Waller, our museum educator, does a great job in lining up these talks. They're really informative, timely, like this one. And it's one of the benefits of being a member that you can come and enjoy the lecture for free. It's part of being a member. And that's just one of the benefits of, by the way, I am with the Shameless Commerce Division of the History Center. I tell my staff, push that membership, push that membership. How many members do we have here? Oh, really good turnout. Okay, thank you, everyone. It's not too late for the rest of you. You get to come into the museum for free, you get lectures for free, discounts on events. You also get to come to member exclusive gatherings. We're having a winter potluck this Saturday. We have a lot of other member only events, previews of exhibits, and you can come and talk to the staff and share your ideas about history and be part of the history community. And so I would encourage you and ask you to please become a member. And you can, if you can't decide tonight, just grab one of these cards at the front desk, and we'll make it easy for you. So please consider being a member. And if you are a member, thank you. This is a really important topic, and Phil Wheeler is the speaker to take it on. And thank you, Phil, for agreeing to talk about it. I just want to say a couple things before Phil starts his presentation. And if you get our e-newsletter or follow us on social media, you will have seen some really great history from Darla, who's our front desk guest supervisor. She helps all the guests who come into the museum. And she is also one of our historians. And she put out a really interesting piece recently on social media and in our e-newsletter. When the state constitution was framed in 1857, the need for settlers and the proportion of foreigners to native born was so great that it was necessary to admit them to local citizenship. Many local townships did not have enough Americans to fill offices. So the state constitution gave the right of voting and holding office to all natives, I should say white natives, not Native Americans necessarily, of other countries, as long as they signed a declaration of intent to become a citizen. And for nearly 40 years, that was accepted, and they could vote. They were, for all practical purposes, citizens. They could vote in, let's see, for 40 years, these pioneers had voted not only in local and state elections, but also federal. However, things change, and in 1897, you know what? We no longer needed to increase our population because we had become a state in 1858, and so they tightened up the qualifications for voting. And after 1897, you had to be a full American citizen to vote. So you see the flexibility or how that it's changing depending on the atmosphere, the environment of the time, right? I also want to say that one of the reasons we're here at this location is because of the George Stoppel farmstead. Everybody knows George Stoppel farmstead. That's the big barn, the stone house, and the smokehouse, which we are restoring and going to be making a public museum. But George Stoppel and his family and his brother, Franz Joseph, were also immigrants. And you could really call them refugees. They came from Germany before it was a nation. There was lots of turmoil in Europe. There was lots of economic hardship. There was political tyranny, revolution, chaos. And that is one of the reasons why George Stoppel came to America in 1848. And they called them the 48ers, because there were so many Germans who came to the United States in that period. And they first came to the East Coast, then they went to Ohio, but they felt the politics of their time. Anyone hear of the Know-Nothings? Oh, yeah. Yeah, the Know-Nothings were nativists, and they were anti-immigrants. And there was a politician in Cincinnati. He was running to be mayor, and he basically started a riot that was directed towards the German immigrant population. The next year, Franz Joseph, George Stoppel, the whole family moved out to Minnesota. Now, there was a lot of reasons to come to Minnesota, namely land, right? But it certainly couldn't hurt that Minnesota, maybe they were thinking, was free of that nativism. So it's really important to remember our history and to have it help us inform our decisions about the present and the future. And that's why I'm really happy that Phil is here to talk about this topic that is so intimately related to all of our histories, right? And Phil is very much involved in the immigrant advocacy program, particularly with the organization Smile, and he's going to tell you about that. And once again, thank you, Phil, for being here.
Whoa. I want to start off by acknowledging that we're talking about immigration, and the only reason we can talk about immigration is because we had settlers taking over land that had been occupied by Native Americans for at least 12,000 years. We have in Olmsted County, in fact, we have cave drawings, cave carvings that were done during the Ice Age. So we're here because we have immigration. We had immigration because the land became available by the removal of the Native Americans who lived here. I also want to acknowledge a few disclaimers. I'm not an immigration attorney. The amount of information I don't know about immigration is encyclopedic. I just know a little bit. I'm also not an historian, so I was unaware that people who are not citizens were allowed to vote, for example. I had heard that Cincinnati was a hotbed of where I'm from, Ohio, a hotbed of anti-Catholic and anti-German and anti-Irish, know-nothing philosophies. In fact, Harriet Beecher Stowe, the author of Uncle Tom's Cabin, her father, Lyman Beecher, was a know-nothing anti-Catholic activist in Cincinnati, Ohio. My involvement in anything having to do with immigration started in 2017, so I'm a newcomer to this. You know, a fraction of my age, that's hardly anything. 6 years ago, 7. And my main involvement has been mentioned is through the Southeastern Minnesota Interfaith Immigrant Legal Defense, and lately with working with others to help 4 families seeking safety here in Rochester, Minnesota. I also have some connection with through Smiled and other organizations with similar groups in Winona. I should point out parenthetically, Smiled, Southeastern Minnesota, is because Olmsted Interfaith Immigrant Legal Defense would have spelled out oiled, and Rochester Interfaith Immigrant Legal Defense would have spelled out riled. Neither of those are as good as Smiled. So, a few questions for you all. Raise a hand if you or a relative or ancestor voluntarily immigrated to the United States. See, no hands. Only 2 hands are not up. You teenagers. And approximately when did you or your ancestors voluntarily or involuntarily, because after all, African Americans, many came here involuntarily, to the United States? 1700s or earlier? 1800s? 1900 to 1950? 1950 to 1980? 1980 to 2000? And 2000 to 2023. Okay. Raise your hand if any of these were a factor in you or your ancestors coming to the United States. Religious freedom or religious persecution. Political freedom or political persecution. Escape from war or violence. Economic opportunity. Anything else? Nobody's ancestors came here to sell drugs, commit crime, none of that? All right, that's hard to believe. So there's a lot of different aspects of immigration I'm gonna discuss, and I want to say, if you want to know more about this, it occurred to me, maybe I should go to the library, and I went, and there are it's a 4-volume set. Each volume is this thick, this big. You can learn a lot more than I will be able to cover tonight. But so demographics, population change, the labor force, and so on. The history of legacy, ancestry type of things, ethnic heritage, our reputation, and some of it's earned as a welcoming nation, the melting pot concept, the tossed salad concept, support for refugees, our history of discrimination on the basis of race, our xenophobia, as was mentioned with regard to Stoppel family, other phobias, and finally immigration law and the path to citizenship, the barriers faced by people coming here. So first, demographics. The orange line is Minnesota's share of its population who were foreign born at the time of a census, starting with 1860. Those 4 diamonds are southeastern Minnesota's share of the population that was foreign born during those 4 years that I looked at. And the blue line is the United States. We are at about 15, we are under 15% now. We have been as high as 15% at several times in our nation's history without chaos having ensued. And I point out that foreign born refers to anybody who's not born here, basically. So whether they're here on a visa or here as naturalized citizens or here as undocumented or here applying for some sort of documented status. And here's how our shares of foreign born population changed over time and in our region. In 1860, 2 years after statehood, our share of foreign-born people ranged from just under 18% in Olmsted County to just under 42% in Houston County, with the average for our region being 31% roughly. By 18, sure, go ahead. Excellent, good question. Do not know. I don't know why, other than that it was settled earlier, so maybe it had a larger resident population. That might be speculating about that. You would think that would also be true of Winona. And Winona is quite a bit higher. So, don't know. Now, by 1870, the share had gone up quite a bit to 33%, with Goodhue County, oddly, Red Wing, and so on, 46% foreign born. And 4 of the counties in our region had a larger population of children of foreign born children than the native born population. And that's possible because some of the children who were born to foreign parents were citizens. So they were native born people. But, well, after they arrived. because
That's still one of the amendments.
nope, that was amended to make sure that African Americans were included, but in the original Naturalization Act of 1790, people born here of white parents were citizens automatically. I think. I see people nodding their heads, and so that's encouraging as a non-historian, non-attorney. So imagine living here with the notion that, with the reality that more people of foreign heritage were here than of your stock, your good American stock, right? And in connection with this, look how many Swedes and Norwegians. A, and then B, I thought Norwegians and Swedes weren't all that glad to be classified together. I'm not sure, but 26,000 plus Swedes and Norwegians. What is that? 11,600 and some Germans. Stoppels would have been counted in that. 8,000 Irish, who were disparaged in other parts of the country, Maryland, Ohio, Kentucky. A whole lot of people from Canada that I was unaware of. Why would people move here from Canada? I don't know. It's cold, yeah, and it comes south for the warmer climate, right? And then England, Scotland, and Wales, 3,600. By 1880, the share had dropped a little bit, still 42.2% in Goodhue County. Olmsted County still the lowest, with an average of 31.5%. I want to point out it's the first census that included the correct spelling of Olmsted County, which we are still struggling with here as a community, and also Wabasha County spelled correctly for the first time. And again, the Swedes and Norwegians dominate. Almost 28,000, 17,000 Germans, people from the German Empire by that time, because the Prussia had won its conquest. 7,500 from Ireland. This is of people of foreign birth, not of people of Irish heritage. And again, Canada, 6,100 people. By 2020, the share of foreign-born people averaged 6.7%. Pretty low and not a threat to our culture much, you would think. The range is from 0.8% in Houston County to 10.9% in Mower. Olmsted County is 10.8%. The size of those pies reflects the relative size of the population, and you can see that was the case for the other maps also, that Olmsted County is now the largest of the regional counties. These counties, by the way, are the area covered by the Southeastern Minnesota Interfaith Immigrant Legal Defense, and also Region 10, the defunct Region 10. If we're not for international migration, our region over the years from 2010 to 2022 would have grown by 8,000 people. Because of international migration, it grew by 20,086 people. We currently have an unemployment rate of 1.4% in our Rochester metropolitan area, which is 4 of these counties. That's the average. So since most migration occurs in age groups related to labor force participation, the people who are between ages 16 to 64, actually a younger group than that, and their children, our labor force circumstance would be a great deal worse were it not for international migration, a great deal tighter. It's tight enough now that people can't fill jobs. as one tragic example, the Mocha downtown where Sue and I like to drink coffee in the Peace Plaza, couldn't keep workers, didn't have enough workers to stay open. Feel our pain, I'm sure. So here's the projected labor force change according to the most recent state demographer's projections. And these are a little more optimistic than their previous set. One county, Olmsted County, the labor force will grow by 40% plus. I don't know if you guys can read those numbers. The ones that are the beige are going to grow between in labor force between 0 and 5%, and all the blue ones are going to decline in labor force. And what Winona County is going to decline quite a bit, by about a quarter in terms of its labor force. Part of that has to do with a shift from a manufacturing economy to a service economy, health services being a big part of it. Much of it has to do with the retirement of the baby boom. And the fact is the baby boom is aging a year every year, basically. And as they retire, they move out of the labor force. And unless we have either domestic or international migration to make that up, we lose the labor force. Now, one thing, Canadians may disagree, but Minnesota lacks oceans, lacks mountains, lacks climate, has a climate such as it is. And so attracting people here is harder than it is for places that arguably aren't any nicer, but may appear nicer to the uninformed. So I'm going to move into the history of immigration law for a bit. And I might have to move around to this side. I got to stay close to this speaker. So in 1790, we had our first naturalization law passed, signed by George Washington, and it made available citizenship basically to any white person who came here and they were eligible for naturalization. I'm not sure what the tests were. In 1868, there was a restriction on prohibiting the immigration, not necessarily path to citizenship, but just coming here at all, of any Chinese women. And the theory was promoted in California in particular that Chinese women were prone to prostitution. And rather than enforce laws against prostitution, they said, we'll just do it this way. In 1870, they added to the eligibility for citizenship people of African heritage, and that was partly as a result of the Civil War and the need to make sure that African Americans could vote as part of Reconstruction, so that we would not end up with the same situation we had before the Civil War of the Senate and the House being dominated by southern states who had just been in rebellion. In 1882, all Chinese laborers, those people who had built the western end of the railroad, were barred from immigration. And that in 1893 was extended to anybody from China, and that remained in force until 1943, when we were in the middle of a war with Japan and needed China as one of our allies. In 1891, immigration law was modified to prohibit immigration by paupers, and I put the Emma Lazarus poem there to provide contrast to that. 1906, whereas if you were an American citizen, you could advocate for anarchy. If you were an immigrant, you could not. Polygamists were also prohibited. Anybody who would not, you were required to renounce any title that you had, a title of aristocracy, so no potentates, polygamists, paupers. The other thing is you had to prove that you were of good moral standing. Now, the other thing is that you had, the burden of proof has always been on the immigrant to prove that they were of good moral standing or not a pauper or not a polygamist or anarchist, and not on the government to prove that you were. That is still the case. If you're seeking asylum, you have the burden of proof to prove that you are deserving of asylum, and the government merely has to decide whether you've offered adequate proof. 1917 added physically or mentally defective, and added to the area barred from immigration. In addition to China, it was basically everything from Siberia to Arabia, through India, Pakistan, what's now Pakistan, Burma, Siam, and so on. All that large area of southern and the Middle East and Siberia and the Far East. We're in the Asiatic barred zone. It matches what we found with racial covenants, excluding people who were considered to be Mongolians. And in 1924, all of this was made more systematic with a quota system that said you could be you had a quota for immigration if your population was, the size of the quota was based on your share of the population in the 1890 census. So if you were whatever that share was, 2% of that population could be that country's quota. So Germany, Ireland, England, Wales, Scotland, Canada, apparently, all had large quotas, and places that had basically had restricted immigration or had only recent immigration, Italy, Spain, Greece, and so on, had very small quotas. That remained in effect until 1965. Want to go back to the 1917 thing. If you were malnourished as a child, you were likely to be scrawnier than well-nourished people. This was a time of eugenics and of that analysis of head shape, dolichocephalic and brachycephalic, and so on. And so those were all factors that contributed to people being turned away at the border, basically. If you were scrawny, that meant you were not physically fit. That would mean you might be a public charge, and we're not going to allow you to move here. Yeah, I see your hand up.
Yeah, just a quick question, and I'm not sure if you'll know this or not, and I can't remember for sure. In 1891, when they changed it, when they started adding new restrictions on to specifically who was going to be able to come in, that's when they opened up asylum too, right? That coincides.
Yeah, pretty close. So the Statue of Liberty had its plaque put on in 1903, but I believe the statue itself was like 1883 or something like that.
I thought those two.
Yeah, pretty close.
When they started adding restrictions and stopping people from coming, they also opened asylum to help in that aspect.
Right. In 1965, under President Johnson, the whole immigration system was reformed to become to have two main factors. One was family reunification, and the other was sort of a merit-based system. There were 7 classes of immigrants. The higher the professional status, the more likely you were to be allowed to immigrate. That's still in effect. So if you are an accomplished florist, flower arranger, that doesn't count. But if you're an accomplished brain surgeon, that does count. That's good. Co-workers at the planning department, a co-worker from Pakistan, we had to make the case, and we did, that transportation planning was a scarce enough field that we could hire somebody from Pakistan. In fact, we had only two applicants. One was an immigrant from Canada, and the other was an immigrant from Pakistan who qualified.
What year was that?
Hmm?
What year was that?
1990 something, because it was after I was planning director. The other thing that they did in 1965 was they prohibited immigration by gays and lesbians. That remained in effect until 1990. And gays and lesbians were not allowed to be federal employees until 1995. In 1986, the last big immigration law change under President Reagan, 3 million undocumented immigrants were granted amnesty if they had been here prior to 1982. And whereas prior to 1986, enforcement of work authorization entailed rounding up people who were working without proper authorization. After 1986, some of that enforcement was applied to employers, not just employees. So that's the changes in law. During all this period, we had several compassionate aspects of immigration law, basically immigration policy. Admission of 214,000 refugees from World War II that actually excluded Holocaust survivors. 1950, that was amended to include survivors of the Holocaust. And in 1953, that was another category was added of refugees from communist countries in Eastern Europe. In the 1980s, we had, I don't know how many, quite a few refugees from Southeast Asia. Minnesota became a large, one of the larger states to accept refugees from Southeast Asia. St. Paul in particular, and Minneapolis, but also Rochester. Population among Cambodians and Vietnamese. In the 1990s and 2000s, we've had the influx of refugees from Somalia, South Sudan, and other countries of sub-Saharan Africa. In 2021, or slightly before that, humanitarian parole for Afghans and Ukrainians. Afghans were funded by the federal government, so Afghan humanitarian parolees, who are not the same as refugees, were provided with rent and early work authorization and other supports through, in our case, Catholic charities and volunteer, organization sponsors such as the Unitarian Universalist Church group that did that. Ukrainians have the same official status, but without funding. So to sponsor a Ukrainian humanitarian parolee means that you cover all of the expenses. There are other populations that have been protected than these groups. Many of them have temporary protective status, which means that they won't be sent back anytime soon. But Haitians, Nepalese, El Salvadorans for a while, Nicaraguans, Venezuelans, if they have arrived before a certain time, have a category called temporary protective status. Going back to the Afghans for a second, the difference between a humanitarian parolee and a refugee is the path to citizenship. Refugees have a path to citizenship as soon as they pass the citizenship test. Humanitarian parolees don't necessarily have that. They can apply for asylum, and if they have grounds, they may get it. But because there's no, the Afghan Relocation Act, I think is what it's called, because that's being opposed by at least one senator on the grounds that they may not have been adequately vetted and they may be terrorists of some sort. That path to citizenship is not extended to Afghans or Ukrainians either, for that matter. And then just a little bit about the culture wars, the xenophobia. We have a long history of it. Talking to Gary Donovan, who's of Irish heritage. Luckily, he's here, and not in Cincinnati, Ohio in the 1840s, 1850s. But on the basis of religion, Catholics, Jews, more recently with the Muslim ban, Muslims, maybe others. Actually, I think in some of our racial covenants, there are prohibitions against Hindus. I imagine that might have been part of a xenophobic effort too. On basis of race and ethnicity, while we all know about African Americans or Africans, people of African origin, Caribbean origin, but also Hispanics, Irish, just for being Irish, not for being necessarily Catholic and Irish, Italians, Eastern Europeans, Chinese, Asians, and so on. Two of our darkest hours, immigration-wise, are the Mexican Repatriation Act of the 1930s, approved by President Hoover, which led to the forced repatriation, so-called, of 1.8 million, up to 1.8 million Mexicans. And this was as a result of saving American jobs for Americans, on the grounds perhaps that the Great Depression was the result of having too many Mexicans and not maybe rampant stock, whatever manipulation. 40 to 60% of the people who were repatriated were actually American citizens, had either established it by naturalization or by being born here. And then that was 1930s. In the 1940s, we had the Braceros program, where we worked out a deal with Mexico to bring Mexican laborers back into the United States because we needed them because of the war. But then in the 1950s was another slowdown in the economy and worry about people being here without authorization. There was an actual military operation organized under the Eisenhower administration called Operation Wetback that resulted in the forced deportation of 1.1 million citizens and non-citizens of mostly Mexican but Hispanic origin. More recently, we've had the issues with deferred action for childhood arrivals, DACA, the Dreamers, and that is still up in the air. Our Dreamers have been here long enough that they have children, and the children are citizens. The children are getting jobs. Pretty soon, our Dreamers will have grandchildren, and yet their status as being legitimate residents of the United States is still in flux. We also have the issues at the southern border with the zero tolerance family separation program, and more recently, the impeachment of Alejandro Mayorkas. A word about family separation. Our church community got involved in immigration issues because of hearing about a group of pro bono attorneys organized under the auspices of the St. Francis Parish Church, who came set up a program to assist parents of children who could legally be here to arrange for their being transfer of custody to people who could also legitimately be here, so that in case they were to be removed, picked up by ICE, put in detention and then removed, their children would be able to stay. That seems like well, it's family separation, but it's also a heartbreaking situation to have to be in, to make the choice between staying here, deporting with your child, or separating from your child. We still have that predicament. You can be an American born, you can be a citizen born here, and have your parents or parent deported. Supreme Court ruled on a case involving a 3-month-old baby that child's citizenship did not extend any change in immigration status to her mother. So her mother didn't qualify for relief from removal, and so she either had to choose to remove or with her child, or choose to remove without her child. There's a program called Special Immigrant Juvenile Status for people who have been abandoned by one parent, at least one. And if you've been abandoned by one parent, you might qualify for relief from removal because you've been abandoned by a parent. You might be here with your other parent. If you are granted special immigrant juvenile status, and you have the right to stay, that doesn't, I've touched the thing. That doesn't mean that your parent also gets any immigration advantage. So in other words, you're here because you're abandoned by one parent. We may abandon you by your other parent. These are, I said to an immigration attorney, this does not seem at all logical. And he said, abandon that thought. There's nothing about immigration law that is logical. You just have to memorize. So now the rest of this is just about Southeastern Minnesota Interfaith Immigrant Legal Defense. And it might be a little bit of a pitch, but here we go. So we are a nonprofit organization. Our fiscal sponsor is the Rochester Area Foundation. We're in a 5th year of a contract with 2 different nonprofit attorney groups. One handles everything except asylum cases, and that's the Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota, and the other handles all of our asylum cases, and that's the Advocates for Human Rights. We have an 11-member board, and it's faith communities and organizations, community organizations from the Southeastern Minnesota region. It matters because if you have an attorney representing you, again, immigration law is complex, so complex, in fact, that all of us have an encyclopedic lack of knowledge of it. But if you have an attorney and you can get out of detention, your chances of avoiding removal are 74%. And the lower figure that I heard earlier today was 68%. If you remain in detention without representation, you have a 3% chance. And that's about a 25 times difference. Even at the lower number, it's still quite a bit, 20 times. Averaging everything for whether you're in or out of detention or represented or not is 46% for represented cases and 6% for unrepresented cases. The 14th Amendment says we're entitled to equal protection, but equal protection shouldn't depend on your ability to pay for an attorney. I've already covered the first session there. I want to point out, summer of 2000, we amended our contract to handle bail, defense, and habeas corpus cases. And I'll tell you why in a second. This is a client, his name we don't know, but his client C. He won his case he lost his case, and he appealed, and our attorneys picked up the case on his appeal, completed filings that he hadn't done properly, and took it to the immigration judge and won his case in March of 2020. That was the middle of the start of the COVID epidemic. ICE said that they couldn't release him because they couldn't provide the required physical exam before they release him. The family asked if they could pay for a private physician to conduct that physical exam, and they said, sure, you can only use this one physician, it'll cost $1,600. They came up with the money, the UU Church helped with that. And they still declined to release him because they might appeal. So by August, they hadn't yet appealed. And so we amended the contract to provide for habeas corpus claims. And they filed a habeas corpus case. And it was about to go to the federal district judge for that when the ICE filed its appeal with the Board of Immigration Appeals. They lost their case in December. When you lose your case, if you're ICE, you get to detain somebody you have to release them by 90 days, which means in the obverse, you get to detain your person for an additional 90 days. So they did, and they released Client C in March of 2021, a full year after he had won his case. And you have to wonder, why would you do this when it costs $30,000 to detain somebody for a year? And I think the answer is what they're trying to do with detention is persuade people who are detained that it's not worthwhile to fight this. And if you simply self-deport, you can come back in 10 years, but if you lose your case, you're out forever. And even if you win your case, you may still not get out for a year. I'm not sure how persuasive it was, but we did have people who declined to appeal after that, even though we would have provided free legal services for their appeals. Most of the people in detention, like most of your ancestors, are not here for any serious crime. None of you raise your hand for drug dealing or anything. Half of them, roughly, have committed no public safety related offense. It's nothing actually. 22% have committed an immigration only offense. That might be illegal entry or illegal reentry or an invalid ID. 11% have committed an offense such as would result in a fine. And 20% in the fiscal year 2020 have committed a serious offense such as would result in jail, like a burglary or drug trafficking or assault. 80%, in other words, if they were citizens, would not be in detention or deported. And representation varies depending on whether you're have been in, whether your case has been filed in the last 90 days or whether you've been there for a while. But about half are not represented. And again, reflecting the strategy of ICE to put people in detention and persuade them to self-deport, that percentage is very low for people who have a young case, a recent case. 8% are represented. We estimated back in 2020, based on national statistics by metropolitan area and by county and state, and our mix of regions of origin for our immigrant population, that we had 7,833 undocumented non-citizens here in southeastern Minnesota. I think those numbers are probably low now, maybe by not more than an extra 1,000, but Minnesota's total has gone up a little bit. It was 81,000 in 2022, and we're about 10% of that. By citizenship status, we have quite a range. The brown areas are naturalized citizens of the foreign-born population. So slightly less than half of the people who are foreign-born who live in Olmsted County are here, who are naturalized citizens, and the other half, slightly less than half, are non-citizens. And that's quite low in Mower and Rice County. We're down to 75% of them being not citizens, and that's because of probably food processing industries there. And of the people who are not citizens, the proportion who are undocumented varies from county to county. Higher in Winona, Mower and Rice, and much higher in Steele County for some reason. And then there's a few things about how you can help. There's a new program started by a advocacy group associated with the SMILE called the Regional Interfaith Immigrant Rights Coalition that promoted municipal IDs. Northfield has had a municipal ID for some time, and Rochester just got it. And you can get them at the library. They have a photo, and they have you have to have proof of local residence and stuff. And here they are. Works for a library card, and also getting a prescription for anything that's not a controlled substance. So the more people that get them, the less stigma that will be attached to using them. Go ahead and get one. Support. Yeah, actually, I just walked in. I was the second person to get one.
Okay.
I just walked in and said, "You got these?" And they said, "Yes." First person was Sean Palmer. Council member Sean Palmer. You can also support legislation. We don't have any being proposed, but providing attorneys for indigent immigrants would enable the Southeastern Minnesota Interfaith Immigrant Legal Defense to go out of business. And that would be a wonderful thing. If the state or some other entity would fund legal representation, we'd have a much more just system. You can also support legislation limiting involvement of local and state law enforcement entities in immigration civil matters. All those 80% that don't have to do with, or maybe 70% that don't have to do with any sort of criminal activity. Those could be handled by ICE without the assistance of local law enforcement, and that would make people who are fearful of involvement with local law enforcement safe to do things like report crimes. So public safety would be enhanced. Federal changes in immigration law should do all of these things. And I want to emphasize the fifth bullet there, accelerating work authorization. Having somebody stay here, a family stay here, unable to do gainful employment legally is a tough situation for people who come here to try to improve their lives and yet are forced into idleness. That's not good. In addition, of course, self-interest wise, we have a 1.4% unemployment rate. Keep that in mind. Yeah.
Could you explain how long, what the process is and how long it takes to be able to work?
You have to apply for something, either asylum or some other relief from removal. 6 months after that, you will be granted work authorization. And 1 month after that, you'll be granted a social security number. So it's about 6 months, 6 to 7 if you're lucky. And if there's a backlog, we had one family that waited 9 months for work authorization and another month for social security numbers. And that's a long time. we had one member of that family who, because of having crossed the border twice, so he's in a different category, he still doesn't have work authorization, and that's been over a year. Why it takes so long? The system is underfunded, and the system has deliberate delays built into it. So in other words, for you to come here and seek asylum, at least under some circumstances, you have to have a sponsor, and that sponsor has to be willing to commit to providing for your livelihood for that whole time, because again, you're not supposed to be a public charge. One way to avoid being a public charge is to give you a chance to have a job, right?
Well, I recently spoke to an immigrant. I just wondered about this. Through a challenge of language, he conveyed to me that he was very, very worried because he put in his applications and due to housing insecurity, he was worried about keeping the same housing because how would they mail his authorization to that? You speak to that?
Yeah. Yeah, housing is a huge issue. You have to have a permanent residence in order to get things like not have an ankle monitor on you. Every time you change an address, you're supposed to, within 5 days, notify ICE that you've changed your address and notify immigration court. And by the way, if you notify ICE, you have to send a copy to immigration court, but that doesn't count. This Department of Justice wants its own notification under a different form. So you send in 2 forms every time you change an address. I don't know why. Don't ask me that. But so if your housing is unstable, that adds to your complexity. I think I'm getting toward the end here. There's an organization called Conversations with Friends that sets up pen pals for people who are in ICE detention. Apparently, people who are in ICE detention are comforted by the fact that at least somebody knows that they're there and is willing to treat them like a human being. Support sponsorship of asylum seekers. We could have a number of people coming here who aren't here yet, and we need to organize as a community better to handle this, I think. Right now there are pockets of people doing things, but just being more systematic about it would be great. For one thing, having a way to get people into long-term housing so that they would be able to get rid of the ankle monitor, which one of our people from Venezuela refers to as her shackle, and then be able to, actually file cases on their behalf and so on. The other thing, of course, you can do is, and this is the pitch, donate to Southeastern Minnesota Interfaith Immigrant Legal Defense through the Rochester Area Foundation. And go to our website. I think that might be it. Final words. So we have B'nai Israel Synagogue, Methodist, Rochester, Christ United Methodist Church, Holy Ground Catholic Community, Quakers, the Unitarian Universalist Church, the Peace United Church of Christ, and maybe some others I'm missing. Alliance for Chicano, Hispanic, and American, and Hispanic American. IMAA, all represented on our board. And we all have different faith traditions and other value systems that we espouse. So we represent a wide range of community organizations and faith traditions, but our moral compasses all point in the same direction toward justice. So I will be happy to answer questions. And how are we doing time-wise?
We're right at 8 o'clock, so in respect for everyone's time, we need to, otherwise Phil will be around after for a few questions if you're interested. So, thank you, Phil.
Thanks.
And reminder on the 29th of this month for members, we are having a representative of the Minnesota Historical Society who is going to give a presentation about the history of county historical societies, why they matter, and why the state legislature authorized county governments to fund them. Didn't require that, but authorized it in 1928. So if you're curious about why we're here as a county historical society, come to that presentation. Thank you once again for coming.
You know, anybody want a non-expert answer on anything?
I'm gonna try to say things. So my great grandmother was taken against her will, Ireland, and brought over here, married.